So, I think it's, in one sense, it is that anarchistic democratization. It's a natural outgrowth of people being deprived of the structure of a church, so that they are finding in their day-to-day lives some of these same spiritual experiences, and realizing that we serve each other in many ways that would be covered by a dedicated priest or minister or whatnot. At the same time, there's something to be said for the, shall we say, technician of the sacred, someone who feels they have a vocation. And you yourself, Bob, at one time were considering the priesthood in the Anglican Church, as I recall, and even studied toward that end. So, I think there are people that have a vocation to spend 24/7 working as a priest. And I'm not saying that other people can't fulfill those functions, but when you expand that term, I think we might be in danger of losing some nuance, if you know what I mean. Just my 2 cents.
Terms are interesting because I know a lot of people who won't say the word God because they feel that people have used the word God to mean something so different from what it actually is, that it's corrupted the word God. And I find that fascinating because in all the different variations, the vacuum, the universe, the source, all these other things, there just isn't the same thing, that same idea of one supreme, unified, spiritual entity that drives humanity towards goodness. And so it's really difficult when trying to communicate about these things. Because even if you're talking about dogs, right? One person's dog means a big black Rottweiler guard dog that chases away the bad guys. Another person's dog is something that you put in your handbag and take to the mall with you. So even using an absolutely simple word can lead to huge misunderstandings between what people mean. And so it's an interesting time that we live in, where we're trying to redefine what it means to be a person with a moral backbone.
See, I mean, with me, that seems to be the problem, though. Because like I've listened to you, and I've listened to Tan, and I've listened to Otto, and everybody, and you guys have said some amazing stuff. Okay, and I've done the research on stuff going all the way back to the primordial times, when people would worship the sun instead of the sun god, you know what I mean? And there's things that people today are trying to reinvent, in my opinion, you know what I mean? Like a lot of these pagan beliefs that are actually a part of history is being used for things like freaking New Age religions and New Age mysticisms and stuff like that, and they're not being honest, or not really honest, but like forthright about where they're actually getting their information. You know what I mean? And how that blends in with today's kind of thinking.
Yeah.
But this sort of lacking nuance and redefining words is a wider issue. I mean, I have criticised people many times, and Roger knows, about the terms Nazism and fascism. That has been those words have been corrupted or misused.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and yeah, I'm famous for, like, are you talking about the Italian political philosophy of the early 20th century, which has a very different ideas, goals, and underpinning ideology than, say, National Socialism or Falangism, or even what's his name there that took over Peronism in Argentina. So these are all different, very nuanced. And one of the funny things about them is when you actually study them, like read their writings and stuff, you start to realize that, it's a very interesting bit of history, but they're really concerned with a completely different set of social and political problems than we have today. I really think most of these philosophies are pretty much irrelevant to most of what we're coping with, and yet people jump all over them. It's like the neo-pagans that Roger was talking about, where people are seeking for spirituality. They've been told again and again, you don't dare be a Christian because that's cringe and evil and da-da-da-da-da and all the bad things in the world. Christians and the witch hunts and stuff. They used to have witch hunts in 300 BC. Okay, there was a plague going on in Rome, and they went through and they found all these people, your poisoners, your sorcerers. They had all kinds of executions. I forget how many people. They were driving people. That this is the same behavior kind of deal. So the neo-pagans, to my mind, if you want a pagan religion, and by which I define neither Christian, Muslim, nor Jewish, well, go to somewhere where there are actually practicing pagans. Go to India. Buddhism is arguably a pagan religion since it's not one of the big three. Study living, how people are actually doing it, because these guys basically, a lot of times, I think, first of all, they're coming out of a Christian culture. The West is Christian, and I love G.K. Chesterton that said, if you really want any touch with the old pagan traditions, you have to go to the church. Because everything else we have in our society is basically the result of us being a Christian society. The newspaper, the kinds of government we have, the idea that, a lot of these ideas about the dignity of human life and stuff come out of this, I think. But if you really want to go back to the old traditions, you go to midnight mass, and that's like, it's, if you could look at that with pagan eyes, it's a wonderful sun worship thing, the physical sun in the sky, the God in the sky. The Christian, of course, is spiritualizing this. It's a different sun. But that was always one of the things that brought the pagan community over into Christianity, the similarity in symbols with a shift in the spiritual meaning. But with the guys today, I respect anyone that's seeking, and that kind of reminds me of what we were talking about a little while ago about when Bob was saying about how people don't use the term God because of the misunderstandings that can accrue. And I was thinking, if you go on the spiritual path, no matter what it is, you're trying to get closer to God. You're trying to get closer to that spiritual truth, which is basically inexpressible. So all something like the church does is provide you with a path within the paradigm of your society in terms you can understand, because no word is going to be able to properly describe it. All you can do is give people a mechanism to help them reach this themselves through whatever means, kind of deal. But I do worry about some of the. I was going to say I do worry about some of the neo-pagans running around. But go on, Bob.
There's a really interesting story somewhere in the New Testament, possibly in the Acts of the Apostles, that talks about after Jesus died, there was this huge debate amongst the Jewish leadership about what they should do about this. They'd managed to get rid of this guy that was spreading misinformation and that was dissing the system and bringing all these conspiracy theories to light. And they'd managed to get him out of the picture by murdering him, and that was cool. But they didn't know how to stop these stupid people who kept on believing his misinformation. And there's a really interesting little passage there where the one guy says, if what he says isn't the truth, it'll die out. But if what he says is actually true, it will remain over time, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I think that it's very interesting when you think about the development of religion in the British Isles, that Anglicanism was a new religion that was created the British people took the Christianity that came to them and they decided to integrate it with their pre-existing understanding of divinity. And they updated their language and they updated their concepts and they jumped forward, quite a few years from a Stone Age representation of the understanding of the world to a much more like Iron Age, perhaps, understanding.
Okay, you're talking about the pagan to Christian jump, right?
Yes. What I'm saying is that
would have been a Catholic church then. You said Anglican church. I'm like, what? Anglican church back then? 300 AD? You meant the Catholic Church,
Catholicism, when what became Catholicism reached the British Isles, the British people were very different from the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe sort of said, oh, okay, if you say so, we'll do that. But when the British people looked at it, they said, we've already got a really good way, but this way fits in with our way, so we'll adopt this thing. I mean, for instance, Christmas and Christmas trees and, Easter. Easter already occurred on a ceremony that was celebrated in the British Isles. So what I'm trying to get at is that there's an underlying understanding in human beings about what the spiritual world is. And whatever the religion is called, it doesn't change what the people do in order to try and have a relationship with that spiritual world. And pagans, or some people nowadays, tend to not want a relationship with the spiritual world. They just want a way of doing things right, which is a completely different rationale to wanting to actually relate to the spiritual.
That's actually, I think, a good insight into, and Chesterton said something similar about the older pagan religions were more about the older idea of you just did what was right, and what was right was what the God wanted, and then you just did that. You didn't have that personal moral framework to which you relate, that check on things that Tan was talking about earlier, that moral conscience, and moral consciousness too, I guess, sort of thing. It's more than just doing it right. You have to be right as well.
I'm not sure if it's a question of rightness as much as staying alive. Do the right thing so that you don't die of a disease. You don't cause a vendetta in your family, or
keeping social stability. You're saying, basically.
Yeah. I'm saying that the point of these, as I see it, the point of these systems that tell you how to be right are to promote a communal lifestyle. Yeah. Whereas the point of having a relationship with something bigger than yourself is much more of an individual pursuit.
We actually had a good conversation on this, Otto, because if you remember, I think it was on your show where I had mentioned this goes back to the Babylonians, where there was a ritual that took place within the Babylonian communities that was religious, where the person who was I guess you'd call it the Babylonian king, he would have to be slapped in front of freaking everybody so that he would show a tear. That eventually became ritualistic, and for everybody to feel confident about the Babylonian Empire, I guess you could call it, they had to see him actually cry after this priest smacked him as hard as he could. If it didn't happen, there would be an omen.
Right.
So
It was
the
necessary for it to be a successful reign.
right, and these men would literally practice crying so that whenever they were smacked, they could freaking cry on demand.
Well, what I was thinking, and this kind of links to that, what Bob was saying, it kind of reminds me of the difference between a shame-based and a guilt-based culture. Because the shame-based culture is more communal. It's more, what would the neighbors think? What would my family think? What would all the people, what would my ancestors think? What would my descendants think? You're worried about how you're affecting those around you. Whereas the guilt-based culture is, how could I have done that? And perhaps it comes from, what would God think of that? What would what would my higher self think of that? What would my soul? This might have damaged my soul. I remember, I think I told everyone the story. I used to work as a telemarketer, and I did pretty good at it until things were getting tough. So they basically told us to lie on the phone, and I wouldn't do it, and I was getting in trouble for it, and I finally quit. And I had to sign out and give up my ID to get into the building. It's a security thing. And I went to see the security guards to turn in my ID, and they're like, "You're leaving? We always like talking to you. Why are you going?" And I explained to them what happened, and they said, "Yeah, but why are you quitting?" And I had to think about it for a minute, and I said, you might laugh at me for saying this, but when I think of it, the only honest answer that comes back is, I really think that this is bad for my soul, and I can't do this anymore. And but that's that whole thing about that communal thing that Bob was talking about, as opposed to that individual awareness of stuff. And that works in there with the king being slapped. That's a public shaming.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, you're getting him beyond shame and making it more important to him what the God wants, what the priest, as the representative of the God, wanted. So, yeah, that's my rant.
I wanted to say another thing about what you said earlier, Roger, about when they say that people worship the sun. One of the problems that I have with people putting interpretations on ancient religions is that the use of the words have changed so much. Nowadays, when we say the sun, we think of the yellow thing that burns up there in the sky. But the word the sun actually meant, in ancient languages, the word sun meant the thing that gives you the life force, the thing that makes stuff grow, and it was considered to be beyond the sun. And so now we have the remnant of the word, and when people go back and look at ancient documents, they read the sun from our mindset, not from their mindset.
Yeah.
So it's another confounding factor with sort of
And yet
looking
I would point out to you, though, that everything you said about the sun is demonstrably physically real. The sun is the source of all life. The sun is what keeps us warm. The sun is responsible for all growth. But yeah, they definitely, we think of this ball of plasma 93 million miles away with all the, fusion going on and all that kind of stuff. And it's just one of all these other things. It reminds me of the Latin word spiritus, spirit, which literally means air. I think for the ancients, they had a very concrete idea of these things. There is that beautiful thing in the sky. I was freezing. It rose up over the horizon. I'm warm now. Thank you. And
No, with both of you, one thing I've got to say is like the conversation has been amazing because for one thing, both of you are talking straight up linguistics. Okay, and you don't hear people break it down to the actual language that's taking place. Okay, that's and I want to point that out that both of you are talking linguistics. You know what I mean? And that's very important because a lot of people do not understand what the whole thing with the sun is. Like there these primordial beliefs actually explain that the sun is it represents something. You know what I mean? It's not just a ball of plasma sitting in the sky. You know what I mean? These people believe that the sun meant something, and you hear things like the world tree. Um, that's a very very spiritual thing back in the day. You know what I mean? And they did believe in it. You can see it all across religions, stretching from Europe all the way to India. Every one of them has a tree that is linked together in one form or another through the Indo-European language groups. But you tell that to people who are part of those separate religions, and they throw a fit. You know, right? Well,
like 5 hours worth of tree thought, right? You will come up with so many things that happen in the tree. The sugar goes here and the other stuff goes here, and then this thing goes there, and then a cell does this, and then this thing goes up. Do you know, when I inject the avocados, I take a drill and I drill a hole into the trunk of the avocado, and I screw a syringe into that hole, and then I load the plunger, and I leave it overnight, so that overnight that acid in my syringe is sucked up into the bark of the tree. And then the acid is taken up to the top of the tree from the little place that I injected it in. It's taken up into right to the very top leaves. And as it goes up further and further, the branches get smaller and smaller. So the acid is divided up at every junction. The acid gets divided up and it goes to the leaves. The leaves do whatever leaves do. And then they send the acid back down through another channel, and it goes all the way down to the roots. And then when it gets to the roots, it's pushed out of the tree. And only when it's pushed out of the tree does it do the job that I want it to do, which is killing the fungus on the roots. And that fungus that's on the roots is acting as a protective barrier, which is stopping the osmosis. And so the tree can't suck water in because it's got this fungus. I kill that fungus and I start living. Okay, so I've said that in a few seconds, few minutes, and it's kind of interesting. But if you stop and sit with that for 14 days, while you understand that a tree is like a miracle, it's like a blueprint for what God is.
Yeah, we take too much for granted.
That's why I think the trees are used in spiritual people's descriptions, not because of the tree you see in your garden, but because of the function of the tree.
Mm-hmm. I've actually dug really deep into that. When it comes to the ancients, it's see, this is where I get weird. Even people who believe in the paranormal and stuff don't really like hearing this, okay? Because like, even on a spiritual level, when it comes to the tree, the connection between how the brain works and how a tree functions is very, very similar. You know what I mean? Like, we have fibers that are within our brain. We have the mossy fibers and the climbing fibers. And the odd part about it is like the way trees are represented and the way they function physically coincides with the way our brain functions in physics and everything within our brain. Okay, and that's hard for people to grasp a hold of. You know what I mean? They don't want to understand that, and it's weird that from ancient times all the way to now, I mean that has always been a common theme. Like everybody has always grasped the concept that the tree is something important. You know what I mean?
They're very impressive. And you know, Bob was talking, I was thinking about that whole scalar invariance, the fractal thing, you know, that which is above is like unto that which is below and vice versa. You know, when we look at a tree or really any part of our environment long enough to really consider its miracle and it's the way it exists, I think it gives us an inkling into larger things. You know, I used to meditate on trees quite a bit when I was younger, and I always used to say you could learn everything you need to know about the universe from studying a tree. It might not quite be literally true, but I think there is a lot to be found in paying attention to the particular, especially trees.
Hey, Otto, guess what?
What?
Write this in your diary.
Okay.
I agree with you.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness. After I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of hours of discussion, we finally had right to this wonderful point. Opa. I will write this down, today's date and everything. It is. Oh my goodness. The 6th of March, 2026, I think? Yeah.
Wow. Now, I do want to say the reason why I've been real quiet is because whenever it gets into good conversation like this, I tend to like make it go a little crazy. Like Tan is wanting to really get into religious discussion, and this has been an excellent religious discussion. And I think it's what he's wanted, but I always start, you know how I am. You guys have all been around me, you know how I do things, so I really do appreciate freaking hearing everything you had to say.
It's fascinating. It's so great. I'm grateful too. It's lovely to be able to talk about these things. So many people don't.
So how about that minds.com, guys?
Whatever. You got anything
Minds
better to
Roundtable,
talk
after
about?
all.
You got anything better to talk about? I'm getting so sick of hearing about minds.com. Minds.
Roger.
Man, maybe you should rename this show to Roger Hanson's Roundtable.
No. Now, Minds Roundtable actually kind of created itself. Like, I always say this stuff, and it really has. Like, I've done very little to do anything on this show, and it's like everybody else has freaking built this show. All I do is put the stream together and hit record. You know.
What's the most humiliating job there is?
Minds is a very amazing place.
Yeah, it really
the
is.
Real Minds Underground is the only place to be on the whole of the internet. You just have to search for it a little.
What? Does he still have that Minds Underground thing?
Fully. Minds wouldn't be Minds without the underground.
Oh, I see. You're talking about this.
No.
Renaming to...
No.
Well, you know, I mean, a roundtable in theory discusses anything that comes up. And I mean, you can only speak so much about minds.com itself. There's so many other interesting things to talk about. Why should we restrict ourselves? You know, these are the top minds on minds are getting together to discuss topics that no one else would even go near.
And I mentioned this last night too, and everybody always seems to shrug this off, but like, these are everybody here except for V is an actual freaking Minds member. You know what I'm saying? Like and that's pretty much how it's always played out on Minds. Everybody's on the show is actually on Minds.com usually. So I mean, I think
Yep.
I think having members of Minds come on here and just be able to hang out and talk about serious conversations is important. Like if you go on Minds, how many people say they're a part of Minds and all they do is they dump their crap on there and they don't freaking do anything community wise?
Yeah, this is a community event.
You know,
Definitely.
it's like the Infinite Imaginarium. That was a community, or that is a community effort. So's freaking this one. There's also Quantum Gathering, which is totally top secret.
Yeah, don't spill the beans, Roger. Everybody will start asking about it, and then you know what will happen.
That's right.
You have
Yeah.
to keep it a secret. You haven't got the clearance.
We'll go viral otherwise. We don't want that.
Right.
Terrible. We don't
Yeah.
want them. Ew.
He needs popularity. Yeah.
Now, just to answer you, Tantu, there is an actual group on Minds called the Minds Underground.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that started by Mike?
Yep,
Mind Gaming?
Mike and Story.
Right.
And Bob
But
probably.
he left mine. So
Well, Satori's still there. Satori D is still on Minds.
Technically, MG's not left Minds, at least
Right.
not last time. I'll have to check the game, but he just disabled his account.
I cheer him on for the effort, you know what I'm saying? Because, like, somebody needs to freaking stand up and speak out about a lot of the stuff going on there. And I don't want to see Mike leave frickin' Minds, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, enough is enough. You know, you go into the help and support section and just listen to some of those conversations coming out of there, you know.
yeah.
It's getting pretty bad.
What help and support?
I wait.
What help and support
I-
section? There isn't one anymore.
Chat, the help and support chat he's talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not even supported by the administration. That's just a community thing where you ask other members of Minds for help and they help you.
The thing that Minds Gaming told me about, not directly about him leaving, but he spent years and years and years and years and years helping other people to build their communities and their platforms and everything. And one day he woke up and thought, why am I not doing this for myself? And so he's changed his focus now. And instead of battling with other people to get them to understand his ideas, he's writing the code himself. And he's putting into practice what everybody's telling him can't be done. And he's actually pulling it off. And I think I've mentioned this about 7 times to you, Roger, but the code that he's written on Lovable to establish your own community, your own platform, if you like, your own node, has been duplicated by 100 different users in the last 4 or 5 months. So what he's doing has actually caught the attention of the community, and they are trying to put his ideas into practice. And so I don't think it's as much that he's left Minds as just that he's moved on. Instead of talking to other people about it, he's like, okay, you won't listen to me. Let me show you how to do it.
It's a good approach because I know he's put a lot of time and effort into it. So I agree with it. You know, he needs to get back into gaming though. He's Minds Gaming, and okay. I mean, don't get me
It's
wrong.
possibly why we're not seeing him. He's possibly right back into gaming.
Well, I mean, he needs to be forthright. Okay, not hold out on the gaming stuff because, like, like Retro Cheat even left mines, I guess, because I haven't seen any notifications of them, and I've had this kind of suspicion that Mines Gaming was Retro Cheat.
No, really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, because they're both really smart.
One clue, I
They're
guess.
both men too. That's not necessarily. Just being a smart guy doesn't mean that you're all guys.
You notice
Roger Hansen could also be called Mind's Conspiracy.
that's
Yes.
that's kind of what I was getting ready to say. You know,
Remember, Roger, your allegations of Minds Gaming and Bill Ottman
Bill
being
Ottman.
the same person.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it makes sense. It does make sense. Just
I know it's
Flat Earth theory, I've heard, makes a lot of sense.
no, I'll
So-
tell you. Oh, go
Look
ahead.
around, you'll see the Earth is flat. I mean, what more proof do you need?
Well, don't.
It is
Oh.
flat for about 11 miles or so. So, yeah, it is flat up to a point.
I can't believe how much of a science they've tried to turn that into. Like, I went on and did an interview with DK Spiracy, and he explained all that stuff out to me, and I was like, oh my god, how can they turn around and complicate something like a freaking flat disc? But sure enough, they did it.
It's a forced meme at this point, I think. But you know, there's I know Bob's seen it because I think I read it to her, but where she's read it, they did these things, the Bedford Canal experiments, where they had the flat Earth guys versus the round Earth guys. They got all this equipment and they were going to measure distances along the Bedford Canal, which apparently extends far enough to be you can notice the curvature of the Earth over just the line of sight. So they got all this thing, and they had like these two teams, and the team that was for a round Earth said, see, we've proven the Earth is round. And the team that was doing the flat Earth, they had all their measurements, and their measurements showed that the Earth was flat. Which just goes to show that, you know, everybody's going to see, the mind comes first. You're going to see the evidence that your mind is prepared to see.
Well, I've heard that the really, really interesting theory, the new theory that's come up to disprove the flat Earth theory, and the one that really, really disproves it once and for all, is the flat sun theory.
Ooh, the flat sun. That's a good one. How's that work?
I haven't looked into it, Otto. I said that as a joke.
Well, you know, from a 5 or 6 dimensional viewpoint, I guess it would be a flat Earth, right? Or flat, you know, just it would lack a dimension, but not literally from our 3D perspective, I don't think.
But
I'm leaving that time.
I do have to say one thing. The one theory that I think is actually legitimate in a way, I don't think we understand it fully, is the hollow Earth.
The hollow Earth.
Because of the cave systems and everything, and we don't know what's actually down there. You know what I mean?
Roger, we do know what's down there.
Yes.
You noticed when it comes up what it is.
Well,
and it's not bones and little bits of animals and crystals.
Mm-hmm.
It's liquid rock that burns you if you get close.
That's the
Even
exhaust.
if you put a pillow on your head.
Well,
that's from the power plants. That's from the
some
power
of
plant.
it.
You know what comes up out of the hollow Earth? Flying saucers are seen all the time, and of course the hollow Earth contains Shambhala International Airport. It's in an undisclosed location under the Himalaya Mountains, and then you can transfer there to go to Agartha, which is even deeper in the hollow Earth. But, you know, the hollow Earth apparently started with this guy named Sims, right? And he said it would be such a waste of space for there not to be anything in there, so he decided that it had to be. That was his argument. It's like it is a waste of space. Of course, there's got to be stuff in there.
Well, here's
What about Wakanda? Where is that?
Okay, so I have a trivia question for all of you guys. How far down can we dig?
I can dig down about 1.5 feet, and then I just get tired. I just don't want to do it anymore. But I'm old. When I was younger, I could probably dig down about 3 foot, because I used to have to like put up fences and stuff. So 3 foot. That's how far you dig. That's as far as I ever dug.
I mean, human beings all together. I mean, what's the
Oh.
farthest we've been able to dig?
There's some borehole somewhere in former Soviet Union, I think, where they got down. But it got so hot down there, getting close to the magma core, that I guess their drill melted or something. I'm not sure how far down they got, though. A few miles, maybe, a mile or two.
Do you know, Bob Dub? No, you guys
I thought
can't.
it was 3 kilometers, but now I'm doubting myself, so I'm looking it up.
Okay, I figured you
Good
guys
girl.
were gonna do that. Gonna do a Google search.
I just checked offshore. Oh, okay. There's offshore oil wells, oil rigs, 3,000 meters.
So it's 3 kilometers.
So that would be roughly what, 8 miles? Just under 8 miles.
Huh.
Yeah.
How many
So-
chains was that? How many furlongs? Sorry, just kidding.
10,000
Furlong.
feet.
Oh my goodness! Let's not get into the math. It's bad enough whenever you go over the time zones with me. Don't go into the math and calculations and stuff. So, but yeah, it's like that's the reason.
Gentlemen, I'm going to drop for a few minutes. I'll be back in about 15. Okay.
Actually,
All right. See you shortly.
the deepest oil rigs, 7.5 miles
7.5.
for 40,000 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got one here. The Kola Super Deep Borehole, 40,230 feet in 1989 in Murmansk Oblast, Russia.
Also remember, the holes that just formed in Russia don't count because those aren't man-made.
Oh, okay.
Like, because
So here's the thing. It says in many places the temperature rises by about 25 to 30 degrees C per kilometer in the crust.
Wow.
I should translate this into. Translate. What's your system called? Into
English system.
what?
The English system for our sins. Here in America, we use the English system.
Fahrenheit.
Well, yeah. So it's
And
Fahrenheit.
miles. Okay, I'm translating it into Fahrenheit and miles. So the temperature increases by about 45 to 55 Fahrenheit per mile that you go down into the crust.
50 degrees per mile? Whoa!
2 to 2.5 miles down, it's between 200 and 300 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 to 9 miles down, it's about 480 to 750 Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Humans working undergrounds at around 2.5 miles deep, it is extremely difficult to breathe because of the heat, pressure, and ventilation.
Whoa.
The deepest mines are around 2.5 miles deep. Rock temperature can exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow. No trouble keeping your lungs.
Kola super deep borehole that reaches 7.6 miles deep has a temperature of around 356 Fahrenheit. There we go. A comprehensive answer for you, Roger, to your trivia
That's
question.
very, very good.
So you could cook a meal if you just lowered it down far enough.
Now, see the obvious thing to go into after this would be extremophiles. Okay, so we've established 8 miles underground. What kind of extremophiles are there on the planet that could survive extreme environments like that?
Salamanders could. You know, the fire elementals.
You know what's fascinating is octopuses. Do you know that if you put them inside a jar and you tighten the lid on the jar, they can reach their tentacles up and put their tentacles on the bottom of the lid and twist it and unscrew the lid and get out of the jar.
That is so cool.
Oh, they are cool. You know, I wish Panyabasa were here. You know, he was a marine biologist before he became a monk, and he specializes in cephalopods. He talks about cephalopods all day. He thinks they're amazingly cool and as smart as people, maybe. I don't know anything about them, though, except that they have amazing eyes, apparently. Really good depth vision, which just kind of makes sense. And some of them get really big, really big.
You gotta
They're
get.
apparently an alien life form, you know.
Well, yeah, there's a theory. I'm not sure.
Well, I think
I read others, but
pangolins are an alien life form, if anything, and possibly giraffes. I've seen those pictures. That tongue, my God, that's not from this planet. But
When I was in
pangolins.
South Africa, I went to the museum where the coelacanth, the very first coelacanth,
Oh,
is,
cool,
and
cool.
spoke to the guy who worked with the woman who did the work on it and he said that nobody has found a coelacanth nursery. They do not know how or where or anything about their breeding. They're so far down in the ocean that people can't get to them.
It's amazing. That is
And they
so
have
amazing.
4 fins. They have fins on their sides and then fins on their tummy and back. And he says they're like little arms. They're like little arms with a fin on the end of it. And he says the theory is that they walk through tunnels. They go down through rock tunnels to some place where they live. That's not the sea. We just catch them in the sea. But there's some other place, the theory is, that there's some other place in the ocean blocked off from men by these tunnels, and the coelacanths use their little arms to walk through them to get to their secret coelacanth land.
That makes sense, because when you think about some of the mass extinctions, even in the oceans, because of, who knows why, that would protect them and their nurseries. It sounds to me like somebody's going to be putting some kind of a transmitter or something on one of those guys and releasing them back into the ocean. That would be fascinating thing to discover. Yeah.
You see, you don't need to make up what sort of weird stuff exists in weird places that we don't know, because we've already got weird stuff that we could actually study.
Oh, yeah. Where do flying saucers come from? They could come from right here. There's so much of the ocean that is simply we know nothing about.
well,
Well, there's so many different military organizations around the world who are flying things around the skies that they don't want anybody to know about. I mean, obviously,
the old argument that we know more about space than we know about on oceans.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing about the saucer thing, and one theory I've always been interested in, and of course, obviously, especially after the 20th century started, I'm sure a lot of military craft have been mistaken. I mean, one of my things that I go on about is the very first so-called modern saucer sighting, where they coined the term flying saucer, was Kenneth Arnold out, I believe, in California. And he did not describe them as saucers, which is interesting because the headlines picked up saucers and everybody started seeing saucers. He said they seem to skip like saucers. But the actual drawings, if you see what he actually saw, they look remarkably like experimental jet designs that we know people were working on at that time period. I've always kind of suspected, they had they kind of looked like B-2 bombers, like a flying wing kind of design. Not so jagged looking, but designs that like the Horton brothers were working on and continued to work on all through like the 1950s and 60s, right up into modern days. So, but then you've also got reports that I think are definitely reports of something that's very unusual. It's a unique human experience. And of course, these reports go back way before we had any kind of flight technology. So what's going on there? One theory is that some of these things people see in the sky are actually living beings of some sort, a life form that we simply haven't identified. that could live, and the sea is vast, and there are vast unexplored areas of the land even today. And if something is truly alien, would you even be able to recognize it? I always say we've got on this planet other animal species that seem to be at least as intelligent as us. Dolphins, elephants. We even our pets are pretty smart, but we can't really communicate with them very well. How could we expect to somehow have a discussion with a completely alien life form, something from another planet? We can't even talk to our own dolphins. How can we even communicate with something with and dolphins share a lot of our genetic material, grew up on the same planet over millions of years. So yeah, there could be things here that we don't recognize. Something alien could be in the same room with you. Quick, look over your shoulder. It could be there now, but you wouldn't see it. How could you notice it? Philip K. Dick used to talk about something he called zebra, or possibly zebra, depending on what side of the Atlantic you're on. And he talked about it as being like an alien being that is omnipresent around us. It's so large, it's part of the environment, and we've always had it here, so we don't really notice it. And I think of Reverend Kirk wrote a book called The Secret Commonwealth. This was in the 17th century, where he talked about there's this whole other world that coexists with us, that sometimes interacts with us, but of which we're normally and probably blissfully unaware most of the time. So there's a whole can of worms,
It's what you believe is there is what you see. And all sorts of very strange things happen in our brains. And in fact, our memory, the main function of our memory, is to forget things and to screen things out. And we have to, in order to exist, in order to function on this planet, we have to screen out about 80% of the sensory data that comes in through our skin, through our eyes, through everywhere.
Right.
And one of the things that back in the olden days in Ireland, there used to be a witch who lived in a swamp who would come and get you if you were naughty and you didn't sleep. And people saw her often saw her. So like, what happened? Did people see weird stuff because their brains let in too much light, or a weird shift of the something? Or is it that we are prepared to believe what we already think exists?
All of our sense experience is the product of electrochemical processes in our brain. And that we equate reality with visibility, which is sometimes unfortunate. So that if you and I see a tree, we were talking about trees, and we both say that's a tree, and we use this common language, we know if I make the sound tree, it's going to mean the same thing as when you make the sound tree. And in this case, the light impinging on our eyes, the smell of the tree, the sound of it as the wind blows the branches, these are all sensory cues. And yet people perceive things that other people do not perceive. Now, we tend to mean to equate that as meaning, excuse me, that what the other person sees is quote unquote not real. However, you are still perceiving something. Something has impinged upon your sensoria. And of course, I include in the sensoria the mind, because the mind is also a sense object. And as Bob has pointed out quite accurately, I agree with her completely about this, the mind is the forerunner of all. The mind comes first. Any experience you have is going to be mediated by the thoughts already existing in your mind. So if you are prepared to see that witch woman, then you're going to see her, just like the people who read the headline, flying saucers, suddenly started seeing saucers in the sky. They were seeing something. There's something there that is impinging upon people's sensoria, impinging on their minds, perhaps alone. Although these things seem to leave physical traces too. But what they experience is different from what someone standing next to them experiences. And I've read of a lot of accounts like that. They tend to be dismissed because ufologists, they want nuts and bolt saucers that you can kick the tires on. They don't like this ambiguity that exists around this experience. So I would agree with Bob as far as the mind is going to, in a lot of ways, what you experience is going to be predicated on what's in your mind, and this can be manipulated. And that's where things start getting spooky and scary. I say spooky in terms of like spook as in intelligence agencies and stuff like that. I have long thought that Whitley Strieber, you guys all remember Whitley Strieber, Communion? That was the big book that started the big bug-eyed, big-headed alien trend. Before that book got pushed, people reported meeting all kinds of weird-looking critters coming out of saucers. Blonde people saying they came from the planet Venus. Little green men with pointy ears. Normal-looking humans. All kinds of strange beings. But he started pushing, they look like this, they look like this, they look like... Suddenly, everyone was reporting these experiences, and they all were built around the kind of saucer mythology he was pushing about the genetic experiments and stuff like this. And of course, as I've often pointed out, and as I've tried to contact Strieber about, although he has remained silent on the subject, every single thing he wrote about was derived from a movie starring Peter Graves called Killers from Space. The entire saucer mythology, and I think it was made in 1954. It's on the Internet Archive. Anyone listening, I advise you strongly to watch Killers from Space. You will see every aspect of Whitley Strieber's saucer mythology there. Now, did he see this movie as a kid? And it kind of subconsciously shaped how he was experienced this? I tend to think he's a fiction writer. He said in the very foreword of his first book on aliens, he said, I'm a fiction writer and I might be making all of this up. And I personally go with him making that admission in the foreword to his first book. I really see a lot of his work as being a psychological experiment and seeing if you could condition people to experience this phenomenon within the confines of the space alien. You're helpless. You're just like a little tag thing. I mean, before Strieber came along, you didn't have abductees. People didn't abduct you. You had contactees. They would come and talk to you. Hey, pleased to meet you. We're giving you a message. Stop making nuclear bombs. Stop fighting each other. It'd be like really nice messages like that. After Strieber, suddenly it's like, well, they stuck this in me and they stuck that in me and they did this, that, and the other thing.